Hey, good evening, Erev Tov, everyone. So last week, one of the shaylas we spoke about was to do with tefillah b'tzibur. We spoke about the question of if an individual comes late or needs to skip, or what happens if an individual needs to change their tefillah in order to catch up with the tzibur. So I want to talk today about a different case, a question whereby the problem, the difficulty is not for the individual's tefillah, but the difficulty is for the tzibur themselves. Right? To what extent does an individual have to change their personal preferences for prayer, for tefillah, for where they daven, when it's going to affect the tzibur that's left behind? If I daven somewhere where there's a minyan every day, and thankfully here this is not a problem, but if one day I don't come, that place is going to be left behind. There may not be a minyan. Right? To what extent does the individual have a responsibility towards that minyan? And this comes up a number of different scenarios, number of different cases. For example, anybody who's been in Yerushalayim long enough has probably experienced this in one form or another. You're on your way, you're walking somewhere. It could be in the morning, could be in the middle of the day, and you get stopped. Somebody standing outside, Mincha, right? And somebody says, just come, just join with us, just join to make 10. And you haven't davened yet, or you have davened, but you're on your way to a meeting or whatever it is. To what extent, without you, they won't have a minyan? To what extent do you have to stop and stay and help them make the minyan? Or what if it's in the morning, you're walking and someone, they come up to you and they're about to get to Shmoneh Esrei and they just need a tenth for a minyan. Just come and join for a few minutes. You say, well, I only have a few minutes. Okay, it's fine, you can come. And then you come and nobody else comes, and you're stuck there and you're the 10th. Do you have to stay till the end? Can you leave early? The Yerushalmi says that if somebody leaves a minyan early, there's a curse on them. Do you have to subject yourself to come in and to get that curse, or can you just say no in the first place? These are questions that come up. But the other form of this question, which is whereby you're not stopped in the middle of the day, but you have your regular minyan, and like I said before, one day you're not going to come. Thankfully, here this would not be, but sometimes in the summer, lots of people are away, people are on holiday, it's a little bit tight, and you want to go daven somewhere else. Do you have that right? Can you do that? So this particular question was asked, Eretz Hemda. There was, in a certain town where they had a minyan mitzumtzam. There were 10 men for the minyan. That was it, every day. And one day, in this particular shul, one day a tzaddik was visiting the town, and 3 people from the minyan wanted to go and daven with the tzaddik. This was the only opportunity they had to go and see. Were they allowed to go and daven there if it meant that in their shul there would be no minyan? Also, what's interesting about the question, I alluded to last week, when you look through some of these shaylas, the sensitivity and the difficulty is about when you're answering questions over the internet. You have to pay attention. Who's asking the question? You have to pay attention when the question is being asked, right? If the question was, this is happening next week, can we, 3 individuals leave and daven there, when it means they won't have their own minyan? That's one question. That's not the question. The question was, this happened last week. These 3 people left. Were they okay for doing so? Were they right to do it? So if the question's coming from the other side, also we're answering. If the question's being asked through the internet, you don't know what's going on. You don't know if they've asked somebody else who said it was okay or it wasn't okay. And you're going to now go and start a fight with start a sichsuch between the rabbanim. So you have to have the sensitivity, and these are some of the difficulties of asking these questions indirectly. But let's have a look at what the halachic sugya is and what the analysis is. So the first point that's raised is that before we get to the question of the minyan or not, we have a halakha that there is a preference, a very strong preference for one to have a makom kavua for their tefillah, to have a fixed place. The Gemara in Bracha tells us this. It's learned from Avraham Avinu, that Avraham Avinu stood in one place where he davened. It says, Kol hakovea makom letfilato Elokei Avraham ozro. Anybody who has a fixed place, a fixed location where they daven, the God of Abraham will be with them, will answer them. All sorts of praise that's heaped on such an individual. Again, why is it so important to have one place, a fixed place for tefillah? It could be to do with the fact that the person has more kavanah when it's in a fixed place. It could be to do with the fact that it's related to, some of the Farshim say it's related to humility. Avraham Avinu, in a very humble way, went and davened in the same place each time. Contrast that with Bilam, who went to daven somewhere else, hoping maybe God didn't answer me here, he'll answer me there, whatever it was. There was a certain haughtiness that's reflected in that. But that's what the Gemara says, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch paskins. And one should have a fixed place for their tefillah. Now, what does it mean, a fixed place? It can mean two things. It can mean a fixed place within shul. Right? A person has their makom kavua, their seat, where they come every day. It can also mean a makom kavua in terms of the shul where I daven, the Beit Midrash where I daven should be the same place. And the Torah brings both of these ideas. Probably more crucial is the second one I mentioned, which is to have one Beit Knesset where a person davens in most of the time. That is their fixed place. So then, this interesting question comes up. You have your fixed place inside shul. Again, different shuls work in different ways. Different places, some places there's a fixed seat. Some places people come in, so wherever they want. What does a person do when you come to shul in the morning and someone is sitting in your seat? Now, there are obviously ways to do this and ways to talk to people. Unfortunately, sometimes we get it wrong. And sometimes, people will say, a person will daven in a shul and they'll leave. They'll say, I've been davening here for however long. And the only thing that anybody ever said to me was, you're sitting in my seat. So that's obviously trying to avoid that. We have to realize when we take on chumras, a person wants to be machmir about being from Talmidav Shel Avraham Avinu. And a person wants to be so strict to be just like Abraham that we forget about Achnasat Orchim, but we worry about sitting in the seats. So obviously, there's a delicate balance there. But in terms of being in one place, the person has their fixed shul where they daven, their fixed Beit Midrash. That should be the place where they daven. So already, before we're talking about whether the minyan will be left or not, there could be an issue here. However, the poskim write that a person shouldn't change from their makom tefillah unless it's for tzorech gadol. Meaning, if there's a good reason to go and daven somewhere else on a particular occasion, you can do it. You need to go. You go daven in a shiva house. You have whatever reason, someone you need to visit. In this case, the tzaddik was coming to visit. They had no other opportunity. Okay, in terms of the kviyut of makom, there's what to talk about. However, what about the fact that if they leave, there'll be no minyan that's left behind? So we have another Gemara, just two dafim later. The Gemara says that anybody who has a Beit Knesset in their city and they don't go and daven there, they're called a shachen ra. They're called a bad neighbor. And again, the Farshim talk of all the things. If we were to write it, we were to think about it. You have the opportunity to go daven in shul and you don't. You call that person lazy, right? You call them a rasha, call them whatever it was. Why do we call them specifically a bad neighbor? So the focus here is not just on what it does to you, not just on the fact that you had the opportunity to go daven somewhere, you had the opportunity of tefillah b'tzibur, and you neglected to fulfill that. But what about everybody else? The fact that you don't come to shul doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody else. That makes you a bad neighbor. If the shul has 9 people and you would have been the 10th, and you would have come and you would have met the minyan, you're a bad neighbor because you didn't come and make the minyan. Or maybe even more than that. Maybe if it's not just a minyan mitzumtzam, but there are different levels. There are different levels of tefillah. There are different all sorts of priorities, right? If a person has all other things being equal, minyan A and minyan B to go to, which one should you go to? A number of different factors come into it. One of them is Barov Madrat Melech. We try and do mitzvot with more people together praising Hashem. That is a higher level of tefillah. So if I have the opportunity to go and be part of that tefillah, and we'll make it more Barov Am Hadrat Melech, and I choose not to, then there's an element of being a shachen ra. So based on that, it would seem to be that there is a little bit of a reason to say this would be problematic, that you would normally daven there and you wouldn't. So the Rivash, one of the Rishonim, writes that yes, if you have a situation where you depend on people for the minyan, you can impose penalties. The community can take it upon themselves to force people to come and be in shul. The Ramah brings us to halacha. The Mishnah Berurah brings a further case from the Eliyah Rabbah, where he says not just that, but he says, we just mentioned, there are different levels, different priorities in tefillah. So one of them is, on the Shulchan Aruch, that if you have the opportunity to daven in either, you can choose, in a Beit Knesset or a Beit Midrash. And again, all other things being equal, but a Beit Midrash has a higher level of sanctity than a Beit Knesset, and that is preferable to daven. It says the Eliyah Rabbah that even somebody who goes and is in a yeshiva, sits and learns in a Beit Midrash and davens there, but there is a shul, there's a Beit Knesset in the city, and without them, they won't have the minyan. It says, go to the Beit Knesset, go and daven there. There's even a source that says, if you have the local Beit Knesset, which again is going to depend on you for a minyan, but they don't have a Sefer Torah, but there is somewhere further out where you can go, where they have a Sefer Torah. It says no, rather daven closer without the Sefer Torah in order to make up the minyan. So these are some of the sources which seem to indicate very strongly that that an individual has a responsibility towards this communal obligation of the minyan. What about, however, so all those cases are not particularly relevant nowadays, because nowadays, in most situations, what we're talking about in, somebody's out in Helsinki and, there's only one minyan and that's it. There's not going to be anything else. We're sitting in Yerushalayim where there are hundreds of minyan. So it could be that you have a particular shul, then they're going to depend on you for the minyan. But if you don't come, they won't have a minyan. But there are other minyanim around. Everybody can go daven somewhere else for that day. Would the same thing still apply? Would that also be problematic to the same degree? So the Aruch HaShulchan says no. Aruch HaShulchan says everything we were talking about until now is in a situation where there's one minyan. You don't come, there won't be a minyan. There won't be an opportunity for tefillah b'tzibur. That's it. But if there are other shuls and there are other minyanim where people can go, Shalom Yisrael. That's the Aruch HaShulchan. Rav Moshe Feinstein comes along and he says no. He disagrees. And he proves it from the case the Mishnah Berurah brought. He proves it from the Eliyahu Rabbah. He says the following. He says, what did Eliyahu Rabbah tell us? Eliyahu Rabbah told us that if you have a Beit Midrash and you have somebody who davens in the Beit Midrash and you have a Beit Knesset which won't have a minyan, so leave the Beit Midrash and go and daven in the Beit Knesset. Okay. Now, if we were to assume that there could only be a minyan in one place, where should the minyan be? The answer is Beit Midrash, because that we said already that takes preference. If we're saying that somebody should leave the Beit Midrash in order to go and daven in the Beit Knesset, it means without them there won't be a minyan in the Beit Knesset, but there'll still be a minyan in the Beit Midrash. In other words, both places will still have the minyan, and nonetheless, saying that there's importance not just for the fact that those people have a minyan to daven with, but that shul which exists and has a minyan and has had a minyan still needs to have that. There is importance for that, even though people could go elsewhere, even though people would have other opportunities. Nonetheless, we should still keep that minyan going, and that still has importance. That's how Moshe Feinstein learns out from the Eliyahu Rabbah. What we learn from this is something else as well. That not only is it important where there are going to be other Beit Knesset, but it's important where even if it means that going to that Beit Knesset would mean a lower halachic preference, right? We say it would be better for the person to daven, all other things being equal, which they're not equal here because there's no minyan. But all other things being equal, it'd be better to daven in the Beit Midrash. Say no, give up on that and go and daven there. And contemporary poskim bring other examples of this. For example, Rav Sternbach has a case where somebody said, there was one place where you could daven, where they daven much faster, but there was another. But if he doesn't go there won't be a minyan. He could daven somewhere else where they daven slower. He says, no, go to daven in the place where they daven faster. Go there and keep that minyan going. So this is what some of the poskim talk about. They also bring, it's also related to a case of building a shul. This is a case which comes out, the Shulchan Aruch brings, that if one wants to demolish an existing shul to rebuild or to build another one, whatever it is, so the Shulchan Aruch says you can't demolish that shul until the new one has been rebuilt. If in the meantime, in the interim, people aren't going to have a shul where they can go and daven, then that would not suffice, and that would be a problem. So bring it all back to the case at hand in this scenario whereby the three people left and there was no minyan. So the assumption is that if the tzaddik's coming into town and they're going to daven with the tzaddik somewhere else, the assumption is there were other places to daven in that scenario. Still, obviously, there is a preference to keep the minyan going, but does that mean to the point where everybody is going to be held prisoner, that they can never ever, if there's a case of need, never think about going and davening somewhere else? The conclusion of Tshuva was that it seems reasonable that on occasion there could be a reason to go, but then there should be discussion as well. It's possible that they could, if these three people want to leave the minyan, daven somewhere else, perhaps the other people could come daven with them. Perhaps they could come and find a replacement for them on that particular day so that they could daven. Again, these things can generally be solved with dialogue, with Darchei Noam, But that's again part of the trick of answering questions after the fact, and answering questions when you don't know who exactly the questioner is. But that's an overview of the matters at hand.